Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of the first book of Chronicles, that is Divrei Hayomim Aleph. We are about to begin our study of chapter 17, that is Perek Yud Zayin. We have just read the wondrous chapter of chapter 16, in which the chronicler describes the incredible celebration that took place and the prayer of David that took place when he finally brought the Aron Kodesh, the Ark of the Covenant, from its temporary resting place in the home of Oved Edom into a more honorable tent that was set aside special for it in the city of David in Ir David in Jerusalem. Now that this has been achieved, it would seem logical that the next step is to go ahead and build the permanent home, the Beit HaMikdash, that which God had commanded the people in Deuteronomy, and that when the time comes, that it will be time to build a Beit HaMikdash, a temple, and it would seem logical that this is now the time to do it. We'll address this a little more as we read through the chapter. We made a point in the last chapter to emphasize that it was important that, and David had to learn this lesson by the failure the first time, then the terrible disaster that occurred with the first attempt at bringing the Aron Kodesh, that he had made two mistakes. Number one, he'd failed to follow the instructions that the Torah gave, and we emphasized the importance of the instructions that the Torah gave, that the Aron Kodesh has to be carried by people, and that those people are the Levites, and that symbolized the division of labor, right? The division of power, so to speak, the separation of powers, that the Levites were in charge of this aspect of the worship of God and this aspect of the leadership of the people, that there has to be divided appropriately. And we also emphasized that David had intended to put it in his own house, and he learned that no, it has to be put in a separate house, and that is, it has to be put in its own place, right? And now one can then jump easily to make a mistake and think that, okay, God's ark, the Ark of the Covenant, needs its own place. Now let's build it a really fancy, beautiful place. Because as if, so, in other words, before we were saying that we were contrasting the use of the Aron Kodesh that was done under King Saul and the use of Lahavdil of the fetishes and idols that were used by the Philistines and the other nations, that they took these idols in order to obtain benefit from them. They used them in order to get protection, to get success in battle, and so on. And David was demonstrating that that's not the point, right? We are supposed to give respect to God, not use God as some sort of a way of gaining benefit in this world. Now, what one might then, but now that he built a house for it, it's easy to make the mistake and jump to the conclusion, okay, now let me give something to God by building him a fancy, fancy, beautiful house, right? Giving him a special place. That would be a logical next step to make. But that is also a mistake, because idol worshippers make two major mistakes. Number one, they use idols only um, because of the benefit that they hope to derive from them. And this is unfortunately a mistake that people make when they are attempting to worship the one true God. They also think, well, what am I going to get from God? Am I going to get wealth? Am I going to get health? Am I going to get, they treat God that way. And they also make the mistake idol worshippers do of, what am I going to give to God, right? Am I going to give him sacrifices? What does he want? What am I going to give to him? And that mistake is fundamental in Tanakh, repeatedly over and over again, that we give nothing to God. What God wants from us is our ethical and moral behavior. He wants us to do the commandments that he gave us, the commandments he taught us in the Torah. So David is now making the logical mistake. It's an innocent mistake. This is not a criticism. God is not upset with David for making a mistake, but he uses this as an opportunity to teach David and us, of course, an important lesson, which we're about to read. So that's a little bit of an introduction to chapter 17. I'm only going to read the first half of chapter 17 in this podcast, and we'll do the second half in the next podcast. Vayehi, this is verse 1. Ka'asher yashav David b'veiso. When David now settled in his house, after this big celebration, the people go home. Now he has the Aron Kodesh, the Ark of the Covenant, in a special tent. It's the Levium, the Levites are worshiping there, singing there, restricting the access to the Ark by keeping it in an honorable tent. David is now in his house, in the house of the king, remember, which was built with these big cedar planks that were brought from Lebanon that were donated by the king of Tyre. He defeated the Philistines, so he's at a relative level of peace right now from his enemies. So Vayomer David al Nasan Navi, David then turned to Natan, the prophet, or Nathan the prophet. Here I am living in this big, nice cedar home. The Aron Brit Adonai Tachat Yiriot, but the ark that represents the covenant of God is sitting underneath Yiriot. Like Uriah is a leather, a skins, right? A leather under cloaks, it's in a tent. So, like, what's going on? So, Vayomer Nasan, in other words, we need to build a nice big house for God. So, Vayomer Nasan el David, Kol Asher Bilvavcha, say, whatever is in your heart, you should do, Ki Elohim Imach. It is clear that God is with you. It is clear that you're on the right track. You have the right intentions. Go ahead, build a house for God. Um, so that was what he said on the day that David had this idea. So David presumably then went to bed, thinking about, his plans, grand plans to build the temple for God. Nathan, the prophet, goes to bed, wondering what he's going to be called on for the next day. However, God had different ideas. Vayiva laila ahu, and it was during that night. Vayidvar Elohim al nasan lemar, and the word of God to Nathan as he rested during the night. The vision that he had from God was something else entirely. Lech v'amarta el David abdi, go and speak to David, my servant. God clearly uses an endearing language, David, my servant. In other words, I know and I understand that his intentions are good. But I have something else in mind, God says. Ko amar Adonai, so says God, lo atah tivne li habayis lashaves. You are not going to build for me a house in order for me to reside within it, right? That is not your place. That is not for you to do. Ki lo yashavti b'vayis min hayom. Why is this? Why should you not build it? Because I'm trying to teach you a lesson. And what is that lesson? So listen carefully. I have not been living in a permanent home. From the day Asher Ha'elesi Es Israel, from the day that I raised up the people of Israel, this language is almost always used in reference to Ha'elesi, that I raised them up from Egypt, right? Although it doesn't specify Egypt in this verse. Ad hayom hazeh, until this day, from the day that I made Israel into a nation until this day, I never resided in a permanent home. I've been bouncing around. Just like you guys, right? I passed from one tent to another tent and into the tabernacle. That's where I've been. I've been traveling with you, right? B'chol asher hisalachti b'chol Yisrael. During all of my travels with all of Israel, hadavor dibarti es achad shoftei Israel, have I ever asked any of the leaders of Israel, asher tzivisi l'roses ami, any of those leaders that I have put in place, that I have asked, that I have commanded or put in place to be the leaders, to be the shepherds of my nation, Lamar, saying, Lamolo v'nisem li beis arazim, have I ever criticized them for not, and asked them, why have you not built me a cedar house? I've never done that, right? I've always been living in tents. And this is incredibly symbolic. Think about this for a moment. My demand was never for my honor, right? Now, repeatedly, those of us that have been studying together, it's patently obvious, and the underlying theme of this verse is actually what's not explicitly written, but it's obvious to anyone who's been reading even 5 verses of Tanakh would know. What have I asked? I've asked for you to follow my commandments. I've asked for you to live the life that I have commanding you to live. I've repeatedly asked you to live a certain way, to do certain things and not do certain things. In other words, according to my instructions. That's the only thing I asked of you. I have never, ever asked for honor. I've never asked to be dressed up in any beautiful place. It's just simply not what I do, God is saying. So the message God is saying to David, I want you to teach this people this message. Not that I don't want ever a house to be built. Yes, and I'll tell you in a minute, it'll be built. Don't worry, in time, because people have that feeling that they want to honor God, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that motivation. But it's extremely important to understand. And I'm telling you, David, not to build it for me now because I'm trying to teach you this lesson, is that I don't need it. Don't build it and think that you're giving me something. Don't ever think for a moment you're giving me something. I'm showing you the way I've been living these hundreds of years now since they've left Egypt, because what I've always demanded from you is your behavior. Viata, and now God continues his talk. I'm up to verse 7 now, to Nathan. Ko shomar la'avdilu David. This is what I want you to say to my servant David. Again, God emphasizes David in an endearing way to my servant. Ko amar Adonai tzavaos. So says the Lord God, right? God, the Lord of hosts. Ani lekachticha min hanaveh. I took you from the pastures, menacharei atzon, from following all the sheep. You used to be a shepherd. I mean, on the social hierarchy of things, I took you from being a nobody, from being at the lowest rungs of society, the Yos Nagid al Ami Israel, in order to be a Nagid, a chief, a leader over my nation Israel. When God is saying this, remember, he keeps on comparing himself to he keeps on comparing himself to those who have been I'm sorry, I got interrupted for a second. God keeps on comparing himself to David. In other words, I want you to learn the lesson, right? I, God, have been in this type of situation. I have been residing in a tent, right? This entire time, right? Because it is not for me. And in the same way, I have made you the leader, you from your humble origins as a shepherd. I have made you now the leader of the people, right? And it wasn't in your honor either, right? In other words, your purpose is to serve the people, right? And this is a lesson I want you to learn by me asking you not to build me a house, right? I took you from nowhere and made you into somebody. And I will be with you, b'chol asher halachta, right? Um, Actually, with the vav hamahapech right here, in the biblical Hebrew, this is actually past tense. I made a mistake and slipped into modern Hebrew for a minute. But ayem means, and I have been with you in every place that you have went. And um, I have removed, I have taken away all of your enemies from before you. And I have made for you a reputation, kishem hagedolim, just like the reputation of all of the great people asher ba'aretz that are in the land. V'samti makom la'ami Yisrael, and I have made a place for my nation Israel. I have finally given them a place, a land, unitatiu, that I have rooted them in, planted them in this land. Right? In other words, until now they've been fighting their enemies and fighting their enemies and fighting their enemies, attempting to establish themselves. Finally, now this process is over, where we've finally gotten rid of that implacable foe, the Philistines, right? At least remove them from being a threat. Finally, now they're safe and sound. V'shochan tachtav, and they can finally rest in this place. Here, God uses deliberately the term shochan, which is the same language that was used for the Shekhinah, God's presence in the ark, which is representative of the people of Israel in the land of Israel, the people's presence in their land. It's safe and secure, right? V'lo yirgaz od. No longer will they be afraid and tremble with fear from their enemies. V'lo yosifu b'nei avlov levaloso. And no longer will these lowlives, these nothing, these terrible people, the people of sin, the people of evil, come and ruin it and ruin the settlement of the people in the land. Kasher Varishono, like happened in the beginning, right? Like used to happen. No longer will that happen. Ulemiyamim asher tzivisi, right? And um and Shoftim al Ami Yisrael, and from the days that I have commanded, right, and from all of those days, right, right, that I have commanded the leaders over my nation Israel, right. This has never happened until now, right. Um, there have been no victories like your victories. There has never been a secure peace like there is now. I have subdued all of your enemies. Right? And I am telling you, Adonai, right? That in other words, va'agidlach, meaning, and I'm telling you, by doing this, by subduing your enemies, by putting the people on the land, I have told you, I have shown you and demonstrated to you that I am going to build for you a house, meaning not here a physical house, but meaning I am going to make you the king over the people. Um, and it will be that when your days are finished, right? And you go on to your fathers. In other words, you pass on to the next world, and your life is done on this world. And then I establish your children acharecha after you. Asher one of the people, one of the sons that will come from your children. V'achinosias malchuso, and I will establish and set up his kingdom. In other words, when I establish your house later, then we can go ahead and build a house. I want people to know that the house for me is not the priority, right? You're not building me a beautiful house because I need one. Yes, I understand the importance of the temple to symbolize the solid and relationship between people of Israel and the God of Israel. However, that is not the priority. The priority is, right, to live the life that I have commanded, to do the things I have commanded, and therefore it won't be until one of your sons come up that this will be built. He will build me a house, and I will establish and I will solidify his throne ad olam forever. It will be an eternal throne. I will be to him like a father, and he will be to me like a son. I will not take my favor from him. As I have taken my favor away from those who preceded you. God here establishes a special covenant with King David, different from the covenant he had with Saul, which was removed, and different from the covenants, although that term covenant wasn't used with his relationship with the previous judges, but it was, those were also temporary. Although those were the roim, the shepherds that God had commanded, their rule was not permanent. And I will establish him in my house, right? And as my king and in my kingdom forever. And his throne will be established forever. His throne will be secure forever. And as all of these words and like all of this vision, Cain diber Nasan el David, so spoke Nasan. Then the next morning when he woke up, Nathan told this to David. So David received this message from God. David's response, this finishes verse 15 of this chapter. David's response starts in verse 16, how he responded to this message from God through the prophet. We will read in the next podcast as we study the rest of chapter 17. Thank you so much for studying the beginning of chapter 17 together. Looking forward to studying the remainder of this chapter, the remainder of this wonderful book of Chronicles, and of course, the entire Nevi'im and Ketuvim together. Have a wonderful day.